This is one of the most significant cases that the justices have decided in recent years. Here, the Supreme Court ruling that President Trump's use of these emergency tariffs that he has implemented are illegal. It's the most significant economic case to reach the high court in years, sweeping implications for the economy and, of course, for presidential power. And at stake here are billions of dollars in revenue that have already been collected by the government. Pamela Wolf, the other significance here is that this is the first time that the 6-3 conservative court has ruled against President Trump in one of these major cases that have gone before the court since he returned to power in January. Now, we are still going through this case, but this is something we have been waiting for. The court said that it would take up this case on an expedited basis. So they're deciding, even though it's a significant case now, because of course this has enormous implications.
Let's start, guys. Adam is here. There is a narrative spreading right now that needs to be stopped in its tracks. You have seen the headlines. Supreme Court turns on Trump. Justices unite against him. Trump surrenders to a judicial revolt. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like everything is falling apart. It is also not what is actually happening.
Good morning to you. We're coming on the air with breaking news. A major defeat for President Trump's economic agenda. The Supreme Court ruling the president does not have the authority to impose some of his sweeping global tariffs, a decision set to have a massive impact potentially on the economy here at home and also around the world as well. Let's bring in our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. I know you're sifting through the decision right now. 6-3 decision.
Yep.
What have we been able to glean so far?
Yeah, it's a 6-3 decision, Craig, but we should mention Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Barrett also joining the progressives here in a major blow to the centerpiece of the president's economic agenda. The High Court today is saying the president essentially overstepped his authority, trying to invoke a law that had never been used before by a president in this way, a statute that says nothing about tariffs, nothing about taxes, and the High Court saying he does not have the authority to do this.
Yes, Trump just suffered a major defeat at the Supreme Court when they struck down his global tariff program in a 6-3 ruling. That was a huge blow to his economic agenda. There is no denying that. But the idea that the Supreme Court is unified against Trump or that he has somehow surrendered, that is just not accurate. The court is still deeply divided on Trump-related cases.
The Supreme Court is considering a major legal challenge to many of President Donald Trump's tariffs. The justices largely seem skeptical that he has the power to set and change them on his own without input from Congress. The courtroom was packed today with both lawmakers and officials from the Trump administration. This is a major part of President Donald Trump's agenda on both the economic and foreign affairs fronts, and it's one that he has paid close attention to. The tariffs case is important both because that is a centerpiece for President Trump's agenda and because it's really the biggest legal test yet for his second term. The justices so far have been kind of reluctant to curb his really extraordinary flex of executive power, but most of those decisions have been on a more short-term basis.
He has won some big rulings, he has lost others, and there are more cases coming that could go either way. The justices are not acting as some united front against the president, and there has been no surrender, no removal from office, no dramatic collapse. Let us be very clear from the start. Trump faces setbacks at the Supreme Court. That is true.
The big question now, what happens to all the money that has been paid by these companies over the last year? Remember, these were a series of tariffs done by executive order. You see the president's there at the Oval Office announcing these tariffs against virtually all of our trading partners. He used a variety of different mechanisms to try to do it. The court was only looking at one specific mechanism that he used under this Emergency Powers Act, right? And that's the one that I mentioned doesn't say anything about tariffs or taxes. It talks about regulating imports. But the courts that have looked at this before have said essentially regulating imports is not a tax. Doing taxes is for Congress, and therefore he went too far. Again, we're talking about over $130 billion that has been paid by these companies.
But the court is doing what courts always do, ruling on specific legal questions, sometimes for Trump, sometimes against him. Now let us dig into what actually happened with the tariff ruling, because understanding what the court said helps explain why this is not some unified judicial rebellion. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in a case about whether Trump had the legal authority to impose sweeping global tariffs using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That is a 1977 law that gives the president certain emergency powers. Trump had been arguing that he could use that law to impose tariffs on basically all imports as a way to protect American industries and fix trade imbalances. The Supreme Court said no. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, and he was joined by Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett, two of Trump's own appointees, plus the three liberal justices. So that was a conservative majority coalition that ruled against Trump. Roberts explained that the 1977 law does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. Tariffs are essentially taxes, he wrote. And under the Constitution, only Congress has the power to levy taxes. So if Trump wants to impose tariffs, he needs Congress to pass a law giving him that authority. He cannot just do it on his own using emergency powers. The three dissenting justices were Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. They argued that the president does have broad emergency powers and that the 1977 law should be read to give Trump the authority he claimed, but they were in the minority, so Trump lost that case. And it was a significant loss because it struck down his entire global tariff program. But here is why this does not mean the court is united against Trump. First, the ruling was based on a specific legal question about whether a particular statute gives the president tariff authority. The court said that statute does not give him that power. But the court did not say Trump can never impose tariffs or that his tariff policies are bad. They just said he needs to use a different legal authority or get Congress to pass a law. It is a procedural ruling about statutory interpretation, not a substantive rejection of Trump's agenda. Second, two of Trump's appointees voted against him on this case. That does not mean they are part of some anti-Trump coalition. Kavanaugh and Barrett are conservative justices who were ruling on what they saw as the correct interpretation of the law. In other cases, they have sided with Trump. Both of them voted to uphold Trump's authority to fire officials at consumer protection agencies. Both of them have been part of conservative majorities that expanded executive power in other contexts. They are not anti-Trump judges. They are ruling case by case based on the legal arguments. Third, the court is still considering other Trump-related cases where he could win. The birthright citizenship case is a big one. Trump issued an executive order saying that children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants are not automatically citizens. Lower courts blocked that order, saying it violates the 14th Amendment, which grants citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. But the case is now heading to the Supreme Court with oral arguments scheduled. It is not clear how the court is going to rule. If the conservative majority sides with Trump and says the president can reinterpret the 14th Amendment, that would be a massive win for his immigration agenda. Then there is the case about Trump trying to fire a governor at the Federal Reserve. Trump wants to remove her because he thinks she is not sufficiently loyal to his economic agenda. But the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent, and federal law says Fed governors can only be removed for cause. Trump is arguing that as president, he should have the power to fire any executive branch official, including Fed governors. If the Supreme Court sides with Trump, it will give him unprecedented control over the Federal Reserve and other independent agencies. And that is entirely possible because the conservative majority on the court has been sympathetic to arguments about expanding presidential power. So Trump could lose on tariffs and win on birthright citizenship and the Fed. That is not a court united against him. That is a court ruling differently on different legal questions. When you look at the broader pattern of how the Supreme Court has been handling Trump's emergency orders, there is no clear anti-Trump bias. The court has considered dozens of emergency orders from the Trump administration. They have granted Trump's request about half the time and denied them the other half. It is basically 50-50. That does not suggest a court united against the president. It suggests a court that is divided and ruling case by case. Sometimes the conservative justices stick together and side with Trump. Sometimes some of the conservatives break off and join the liberals to rule against him. There is no consistent pattern of the entire court lining up against him. Now let us talk about Trump's response to the tariff ruling because it tells you everything about whether he has surrendered. He immediately went on social media and blasted the justices as activist judges who do not understand economics. He said the ruling was wrong and that he was going to find ways around it. And then he announced that he is using a different statute to impose new tariffs. This statute lets the president impose temporary tariffs for a limited period to deal with trade imbalances. So Trump's new tariffs are more limited and temporary than his previous program, but he is still moving forward with tariffs. That is classic Trump. He does not surrender when he loses in court. He pivots. He finds a new legal angle. He keeps pushing. The narrative that Trump has given up or surrendered to the courts is completely detached from reality. He is still fighting. He is still issuing executive orders. He is still testing the limits of presidential power. And the Supreme Court is still ruling on each case individually, sometimes siding with him, sometimes not. Let us also address the political context because Trump's legal losses are happening at the same time he is dealing with serious political problems. His approval rating on the Iran war is low. Americans oppose the strikes. U.S. service members have died. There are scandals. And now the tariff ruling is creating economic uncertainty. Businesses do not know what tariffs they are going to have to pay. Markets are volatile. Voters are getting frustrated. So Trump is politically vulnerable. Democrats are trying to tie all of this together, the legal losses, the unpopular war, the scandals, to hurt Republicans in the midterms. But politically vulnerable is not the same as legally defeated. Trump is still president. He is still in control of the executive branch, and he is still finding ways to implement his agenda even when courts rule against him. The question is whether his legal and political problems accumulate to the point where they hurt Republicans in the midterms enough to flip the House. If Democrats flip the House, Trump's second term gets much harder. But that is a political question, not a legal one. It depends on how voters feel in November, not on what the Supreme Court rules. Let us break this down into the key points because there is a lot of confusion about what is actually happening with Trump and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court struck down Trump's emergency tariff program in a 6-3 ruling, but the decision was based on a specific legal question about statutory interpretation, not a broad rejection of Trump or his agenda. The court said the particular law Trump was using does not give him tariff authority. They did not say tariffs are bad policy or that Trump is a terrible president. They ruled on the law. Two of Trump's own appointees voted against him on tariffs, but that does not mean they are part of an anti-Trump coalition. Kavanaugh and Barrett are conservative judges ruling based on their interpretation of the law. In other cases, they have sided with Trump. They voted to uphold his authority to fire consumer protection officials. They have been part of conservative majorities expanding executive power. They just ruled against him on this specific legal question because they thought the statute did not support his argument. That is how judges are supposed to work. Trump has won other Supreme Court cases and has pending cases where he could win, showing the court is divided, not united against him. The narrative that the court has turned against Trump ignores all the cases where Trump has won. The birthright citizenship case and the Federal Reserve case are both coming up. If Trump wins those, he gets massive victories. He could lose on tariffs and win on those. That is not a court united against him. The Supreme Court has granted Trump's emergency requests about half the time, which shows a divided court, not one uniformly opposing the president. 50-50 is not a united front. It is a court where the justices are split and ruling based on the specific facts and legal arguments of each case. Sometimes they side with Trump, sometimes they do not. Trump has not surrendered and is actively finding workarounds to court rulings. After the tariff ruling, he immediately pivoted to a different statute to impose new temporary tariffs. He did not give up. He did not surrender. He found a new legal strategy. That is what Trump always does. When one approach gets blocked, he finds another angle. He keeps pushing. He keeps testing limits. So the bottom line is this. The Supreme Court is not united against Trump. The justices are divided and they are ruling case by case. Trump lost on tariffs, but he has won on other issues and could win on upcoming cases. Trump has not surrendered. He is actively finding workarounds and continuing to push his agenda. And there has been no removal from office or any serious threat of that happening through the courts. The narrative that Trump has surrendered to a united judicial front is false. The reality is more complicated and less dramatic. Trump is dealing with legal setbacks, yes, but he is also winning cases, finding workarounds, and continuing to govern. And the Supreme Court is doing what it is supposed to do, ruling on the law, case by case, without uniformly supporting or opposing the president. The political problems are real. The war is unpopular. The economic uncertainty is real. Voters are frustrated. Democrats are trying to capitalize on all of it heading into the midterms. But legal setbacks are not the same as surrender, and a divided Supreme Court ruling on individual cases is not the same as a united judicial front against the president. Trump is still here. He is still fighting, and the legal battles are far from over.